Assalamualaikum everyone. Good morning.
Waalaikumsalam.
I'm
Good morning,
glad to
teacher.
have you all for this discussion today. Okay, so before we start, may I know who's the speakers in our discussion today?
Okay, so first I would like to thank you for inviting me today. My name is NATASHA and I am a transferee teacher that just transferred to a rural school in Malaysia.
Okay, so I would also like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my views. I am HUSNA IZZATI and I have been teaching at a rural school for about 25 years now.
Okay.
That is actually
Okay.
Okay. So today's discussion is to focus on real life issue relate to language learning among children, among our students in Malaysia, and we also will be followed by the solution. Okay, so today we are going to focus on the challenges faced by teachers and teaching second language in the classroom, where we have 3 challenges, which are the first one is grammar translation method, code switching, and limited English proficiency, and also lack of posture. So without further ado, let me start with my point, which is grammar translation method. Have you guys used grammar translation method in your classroom?
Yeah, of course. It's one of the most, I think, the most usable.
Early in my career I use it a lot.
Okay. So, grammar translation method is where we use our mother tongue, our first language, which is Bahasa Malaysia, to teach our students second language, which is English. So, what are the challenges with GTM is that it often neglects speaking fluency, which leave the student with strong reading and writing skills but limited speaking abilities. Okay, because we take a look on the key features in grammar translation method itself, where lessons are taught in the mother tongue, and we observe that there are lack of target language to be used in the classroom. So we are not also teach our student in our mother tongue, but also we only focus on grammar. We only focus on SM. So how can they use the language in their daily life? Okay. So we take a look on the downside, yeah?
Alright.
Okay. Here by Sultana 2019, she said that it primarily focused on completing the syllabus and receptive skill. Receptive skills are reading and also listening. Why we have to focus more on productive skill like speaking and writing. Okay. So the first downside already said, and the second one is not enough attention is given to improve their second language. Okay, and the third one is more usable for comprehension, but do not build speaking confidence. So here I want to share with you about the possible solution that I have found in my research about this downside. The first one is we as a teacher need to be balanced. In order to get approach the student, we also need to be balanced in using all the skills. Okay. Teacher should not just focus on grammar, but the teacher need to use language, which is the second language in real life situation. For example, the teacher need to encourage peer interaction among their students, which the teacher will create opportunities for students to engage in conversation that more comfortable for them to speak in their target language. The teacher also can distribute like some daily life conversation for them to practice in the classroom.
Okay, so I do agree with your point, but can we also consider maybe frequent speaking practice as one of the solution? In my opinion, the teacher can actually integrate activities like debates, discussion, presentation, and even role play in a lesson. And in my opinion, it would build the students' confidence skills and also provide opportunities for real-time practices to practice English. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, can be negotiated.
Okay. So I think both of you offered effective solutions to combat the issue of grammar translation method. However, I would also like to propose that we as teachers should build the confidence of our students. So young learners, especially when they progress to higher education, they might feel insecure about their speaking skills, especially on the rural students, right? So as teachers, providing regular but low stakes opportunities to speak can help them build their confidence. Do you want an example of this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, we can assign a 5-minute presentation where students can express their opinion, seek clarification, or even negotiating the practice. It could foster a more communicative environment.
Okay, all the solutions are very excellent. Yeah, because of your experience, right? Okay, so I already come to the end of my point. Okay, so here I will conclude that grammar translation method is effective in building reading and writing skill, but we as a teacher need to frequently practice speaking in the classroom and build student confidence. We have to be balanced, right? Okay, so that's all for me. We move to other next speaker, which is teacher Tasha.
Okay, so the first thing that comes to my mind when you say mother tongue language is code switching. What do you guys know about code switching? You guys familiar with it?
I think it might means like transferring between languages, isn't it?
That is actually quite close to the real definition
Okay.
of code switching. Code switching is the practice of transferring or alternating two or more languages, dialects, or even language varieties in a single conversation. For example, in a rural area, our students would usually switching back and forth between English and their mother tongue language, which could be Malay, Chinese, Mandarin,
Yeah.
Tamil, or even indigenous languages. For example, the most common phrase that I always heard in my class would be, "Teacher, I tak faham lah this part." Instead of them saying, "Teacher, I don't understand this part." So, sure, some students, they don't know the correct word to use for this particular phrase. But some other students, they just feel comfortable using that way because their peers have been using that particular phrase. So I think these propose some challenges faced in my career actually. So I would like to share with you guys some challenges that I've been facing about this particular aspect, which is the first one is over reliance toward their first language usage. But what I mean by this is that my students had become dependent on their mother tongue language and when they are struggle to find a correct word or even correct grammatical structure to use in English. And these actually had limited their ability to think and even express themselves directly in English. For example, in a classroom, I don't have a specific rules that they need to strictly speak in English. So some students, during a discussion, they would speak in Malay with their friends to elaborate their idea, to share their idea. But when I asked them to tell the class about it, to present it, they would speak in English. And sure, they could speak in English, but it's not actually, they cannot practice it in real time situation.
Yes.
When they are speaking with their peers, that is a real world communication. But when during a presentation, no, they are not using a real world conversation, right?
Yes.
So the next one is a limited vocabulary. My students, they don't know most terms in English, and it actually shows the lack of vocabulary and also prevent them from improving their language skills. What I mean by this is that recently, my students point out birds on the sky. He said, "Teacher, there's a lot of gagak bird on the sky." And when I heard it, I've been thinking like, oh, my students don't know what gaga is in English. So I tell them gaga is crows. But because they had been familiar with the term in their mother tongue language, they keep saying gaga, gaga. For the next day, when I asked them, what is crows? They cannot answer it because they are familiar with gaga bird instead of crows. So the next one is actually peer influence. What I mean by this is that, like I said, I don't have a particular rules in my class to strictly speak in English. So most of the students, majority of the students would speak in their mother tongue language during just a daily conversation or even in English classroom. And half of the others would follow suit. And for example, even there is one student that is fluent in English, because they see their peers are speaking in their mother tongue language, they are influenced to also be speaking in their mother tongue language, even though they are fluent in English. And it had become a challenge for me as a teacher to enforce English when the environment had been socially inclined to be speaking in mother tongue language or even code switching. Do you guys agree with my point?
Sorry. I see a point, but I disagree a little bit on peer influence, where I think that when the students themselves truly understand and comprehend the purpose of why they study second language, I think it's okay for them, and peer influence doesn't matter for them as they have strong intrinsic motivation. Okay, that's all for me.
Okay. That is actually a bright idea. I think I would also agree with that. And I would like to propose solution for this. Okay, my first solution is to encourage contextual use. What I mean by this is that the teacher, as a teacher, me, myself, I would allow my students to use code switching only when there's a necessary situation. For example, when I want to explain to them a complex idea, something they cannot comprehend in English, I would allow them to speak, or I would allow myself to speak in their mother tongue language, but then I would immediately switch back to English once I make sure everyone had understand the topic. And in my opinion, this balance out between mother tongue language and English use could reduce anxiety in the classroom. So the students are not scared to actually been asking me questions when they don't understand something. And it also can promote regular use of English in a classroom. For example, one of my students asked me, "Teacher, I don't understand what is a photosynthesis process is." So I should, as a student, as a teacher, I should tell them, explain to them in English first. And when they are still confused by the idea, then maybe I should try to speak in their mother tongue language. Should explain to them in Malay, for example. And then when I'm sure everyone had understand it, I would point out 2 or 3 students to actually retell it to me about the photosynthesis process, to make sure that they understand it and they can also use English in their speaking. And the next solution I would like to propose is the use of visual aids and also gestures. It could be hand gestures, it could be body gestures. So in my opinion, visual tools and also gestures could support understanding and also reduce the needs to switch back and forth between English and our mother tongue language. And it also could reinforce new vocabulary and also the concept to express their ideas directly from the students. For example, in a classroom, when the teacher wants to teach a new word, for example, a butterfly, the students don't know anything about butterfly. So the teacher show them a picture of butterfly and make them guess what animal it is by giving them clues, by giving them abstract idea. To explain abstract idea, you can use gestures. For example, what do butterfly do? They fly, right? So you show them gestures flying, so that the students can actually guess it. Yeah, so that is the solution that is proposed by me. Do you guys have anything to add on, maybe?
I think those are very achievable solutions that you just proposed, Miss Natasha. So, however, wouldn't it also be better for us teachers to set clear expectations for students to learn the language, especially English, right? So, what do I mean by this? This actually means establishing and enforcing classroom rules that can encourage English use while still making the environment supportive and positive. So, like the behaviorism theory that we have all learned. Yeah, I think teachers can reward efforts like candies or maybe like money to motivate students to speak English. So, for example, the teacher can introduce the try English first rule, which means that students must attempt to express themselves in the English language first before using their mother tongue. I think if a student successfully explains a concept in English, then the teacher can give them positive reinforcement, like feedback as in, good job, you explain well in English. So I think this can encourage the students and their peers to follow suit in speaking the language. So what do you think?
That's actually a refreshing idea, actually.
Thank
Could be used to combat code switching in our classroom. I think that is all from me. Can we
Okay.
move on to the next aspect?
Alright, so the next aspect, okay. We have heard about the grammar translation method and also the code switching issue, right? Now I will discuss another major challenge faced by teachers in rural Malaysian classrooms, which is lack of exposure and limited English proficiency. Okay, so throughout my experience, throughout my careers in teaching, many students in rural areas have very limited proficiency in English. This is because they primarily use their mother tongue at home and also in their daily interactions. Unlike those urban students who live in the city, they have more exposure to English due to media, books, and also their conversations. Rural students often lack opportunities to use and practice English outside of the classroom. So what are the challenges faced by teachers in teaching the language? Okay, first and foremost, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenge that I face is that those students, they struggle to understand lessons that is delivered entirely in English. So this may slow down the learning process and force the teacher to often translate between the target language and their mother tongue. So for example, in one of my classroom, I said, underline the main idea in the passage, but a student with limited English proficiency may not even understand what underline or main idea is. So it caused confusion and delays in my teaching. However, some may argue that teachers should not rely on translation and instead use like visuals or gestures to help students understand the language and the lesson. While this is a valid point, I believe that relying too much on non-verbal cues may also limit the students' vocabulary development and comprehension skills in the long run. So that is the first challenge. And then secondly, I strongly believe that lack of confidence is another major barrier to learning the language. So many students, especially the students in rural areas, may hesitate to speak the language because they are afraid of making mistakes or being judged by their peers. Have you experienced this?
Yeah, it's quite common actually.
Yeah, it really is. So for example, during an oral presentation, a student might whisper among themselves and also avoid answering questions because they are afraid of making mistake and anxious about their pronunciation. So I think this is quite a tough issue to combat.
Yeah.
And the third challenge that I faced is that students do not get enough exposure to English in real life situations. So this is especially true in the rural areas because where their home and community environment are dominated by their mother tongue. So for instance, a student might enjoy watching English language movies. There are a lot, right?
Yeah.
But if they always use subtitles in their native language instead of English, so they are not really truly absorbing the English language. Some might argue that technology such as mobile apps and online resources, this can expose students to more English. So a lot of people agree on this. While this is true, the challenge still remains, in my opinion, that not all students have access to technology and internet. So technology alone cannot completely solve this problem. Okay, so those are all the challenges faced by teachers. Now, what are some possible solutions that as teachers can do? Okay, firstly, I think that and I suggest that teachers, they can create a classroom environment where English is used as much as possible. Not entirely, but just as much. So maybe simple strategies such as starting each lesson with a short English conversation can be very effective. So I have practiced this multiple times in my classroom where I begin the class by asking what did you do this morning? So this may like get the students get used to responding in English over time. Okay, so another solution that I would like to propose is that maybe we can incorporate activities and interactive methods such as role playing, drama, storytellings, and also games, which can make English learning more enjoyable. So, do you have anything to add, or what do you think about this?
Okay, could you clarify that what you mean by using engaging and interactive learning method? Could you give one example for this?
Okay, so thank you for the question, Miss Nazlin. I think, for example, you teachers can play a short animated story in English and then have the students act out different scenes. So I think this can allow them to practice both comprehension skills and also like spoken English. Okay, so that is what I mean by using engaging and interactive learning methods. Now moving on to like my last solution for this issue is that I propose that schools can engage parents and community to help increase students' exposure to English. So have you guys heard of the IBG? Yeah, so that is what I mean by community and parents involvement in that. So that are what I think maybe we can do, the solutions that we can propose to help this issue.
I just want to be clear. Are you suggesting that for parental and community involvement, maybe the schools can maybe organize a speak day English, like for both students and teachers to speak in English throughout the day? Because I think that is a quite opportunity to make themselves immerse in English.
That's a wonderful idea, actually. So, like Miss Natasha said, the Speak English Days can help to involve the parents and community in helping their child understand and use the language more frequently. But that being said, some might question whether parents, especially those from rural areas, they're not really fluent in English, right? So some might question whether they can effectively support their children. But yes, this is a challenge. But even small efforts such as encouraging their children to speak or to read simple English books at home, this can be a huge difference for the students. So those are the solutions that I think will be achievable to help these students in the learning English issues.
Okay, so now it seems like more clearer, right?
Yeah,
For our discussion, so I know what's the problem you have faced in the classroom. So we now come to the summary of our discussion. So mine is that I think that grammatical solution method is very useful, but sometimes teachers don't need to rely on it solely in the classroom.
Yes.
So what about you, Ms. Natasha?
For example, in my opinion about the code switching method, the code switching challenges is actually quite common, and it is easy to combat. Like the solution I have proposed and Miss Husna has proposed, it's actually easy to combat, and I think it's actually achievable.
Yeah, it is.
What about
And
Ms. Husna?
So to sum up my part of the discussion, limited proficiency and lack of exposure can significantly hinder the second language learning. So however, throughout the supportive environment, like I said, engaging communities, activities, and also the community participation, I think we can help students overcome these barriers, especially as teachers, right? Yeah, so I think that sums up our discussion for today. I have learned a lot from both of you.
Thank you everyone for sharing your experience and the solution that I will apply next in my classroom.
Yeah, thank you
same with
all
me.
of you too. Okay, so I think that's all from
That's
us.
all.
Okay.